Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe with your notifications on and I'll be posting daily Teenwolf content. Channels like Jade's Corner and Teenwolf News inspired me to make content, and I've been a Teenwolf fan from the very start. Now let's get right into the video. We open on Isaac telling his dad about his grades at dinner. His dad asks about his grade for chemistry and he says he's not sure what it is, but midterms are in a few days so it could go up. He then asks what his grade is at now and Isaac says he's not sure. His dad then asks him if he's lying to him, and after hesitating to answer he tells him that it's AD. His dad then says he's not angry but he has to find a way to punish him, and he tells Isaac to do the dishes and clean up the kitchen, and Isaac looks relieved. He then drops a mug on the floor and shoves plates off the table, and Isaac rushes to wall and covers his head while his dad throws a glass container and a shard from it gets lodged into his face and he removes it. Then he gets up and says he could have blinded him while the wound heals. His lame dad then says shut up, it's a scratch, and he sees the wound heal, and Isaac rushes outside and goes onto his bike while his dad chases him, and Jackson sees all of this and says they're freaks. His dad then pulls into an alley and he sees Isaac's bike on the ground and he leaves his car and sees someone standing, then they disappear. The figure appears again and goes down on all fours, then his dad rushes into his car and the door gets pulled off and he's killed by the creature. Allison is now in the woods and Scott appears and says he wants to ask her some things about her grandfather, and he then asks if he know about him or that they're dating. Allison says no. She asks Scott if something else happened and he says they have to be more careful now, and he asks if anyone followed her and she says no, it's date night. Chris is now outside of the school talking to the principal and they kidnap him. Isaac runs into Derek's place yelling and Derek asks what's wrong and Isaac says he thinks his dad is dead. He then asks what did he do and Isaac said that's the thing, it wasn't me. Scott says that he feels different now and he doesn't have the urge to kill anyone and he's in control now because things are good with Allison. Scott then asks Stiles if he has anything better than handcuffs this time, and the chain fell out of Stiles' locker and the entire lacrosse team saw this. Then coach came over and says part of him wants to ask but the other part thinks that knowing would be way more disturbing. Scott's eyes glow and he starts looking around the locker room and he tells Stiles that there's another werewolf in there right now. Allison and Lydia are now at the entrance of the school and Allison asks her if she's ready for this and she says please, it's not like my aunt is a serial killer. Lydia and Allison are now inside the school and the world stops as everyone begins to look at them and Lydia shrugs it off. Scott and Stiles are now at practice and he's telling Stiles about the scent of the new werewolf, and Stiles asks if he can find out who it is if he gets him one-on-one. Jackson is now asking Matt for his camera because he needs to record something, and Matt asks what it is and he says it's something in low light all night long, and he tells Matt to get him the camera. Stiles get coach to put Scott in goal and Scott knocks over every player and smells them. Jackson sees this and tells coach that his shoulder is hurting and he's going to sit this one out. Isaac starts running towards Scott and they knock each other over, and Scott sees that Isaac is the werewolf. Isaac begs him not to tell anyone that he's a werewolf. Scott is listening to the sheriff and Isaac conversation and he tells Stiles that Isaac's dad is dead, and Stiles asks if he's a suspect because they can keep him in an holding cell for 24 hours during the full moon. Scott and Stiles are now in class and Scott asks why Derek would choose Isaac, then Stiles says Peter told him that if the bite doesn't turn him it can kill him and maybe teenagers have a better chance of surviving. Scott then asks if the sheriff can hold him because he's a teenager, and Stiles says if they have solid evidence and a witness they can. Stiles then asks Danny where Jackson is and he says he's in the principal's office talking to the sheriff, and Stiles says they need to get into the principal's office, and Scott asks how, then one of them throws a paper at Mr. Harris. Harris then says who the hell did that, and Scott and Stiles point at each other, then they're both outside of the principal's office. Jackson then tells the sheriff that Isaac's dad was kicking the crap out of him, and the sheriff asks if he ever told anyone, and Jackson said it's not his problem. The sheriff then roasts Jackson and says it's funny that the kids getting beaten up are the ones that least deserve it, and Jackson agrees, then realizes that he got roasted. Gerard then comes out of the office and tells Scott and Stiles to come in, he's the principal now. Gerard then sees Scott's last name and says he's the one that was dating his granddaughter, and Scott starts to freak out and Gerard tells him to relax. Lydia is now talking to Jackson and he's ignoring her, and she tells him to look at her for half a second. She tells him that she heard that if he didn't find her and bring her back she could have died, then she says thank you. Jackson laughs and says they're not getting back together, and Lydia says what then. He says just because he stopped her from bleeding out on the field one time she shouldn't expect him to come again, and he also says he's not responsible for her. Jackson says he'll give her one piece of advice, and that is she should stay home tonight, and she asks what's tonight, then he says it's a full moon. Scott runs out of school and sees Isaac leaving in the back of the sheriff's car. Derek then pulls up and tells Scott to get in, and Scott starts saying he did that and it's his fault, and Derek says he knows that and he should get in the car and help him. Scott says he has a better idea and he should call a lawyer because a lawyer might have a chance of getting him out before the moon comes up, and Derek says not when they do a full search of the house. He then says whatever Jackson said to the cops, what's in the house is worse. Scott then gets into his car and they leave. We cut to the Argents, and Gerard tells Chris that he's not interested in the fact that they locked up a 16-year-old kid. He's interested in what's going to happen to that 16-year-old when the moon hits its peak in the night. Gerard then asks Chris if they have proof, and Chris says is the next step killing him, and Gerard says the next step is eliminating the threat. Chris says he hasn't been in history class for a while, but he's sure that genocide doesn't work out too often, and Gerard asks him again if they have proof. Chris then says not irrefutable or insignificant because the driver's side of Leahy's door was pried off. Allison starts to listen and Gerard repeat pried off. He looks at Allison and Chris closes the door. Jackson gives $100 to Matt, and Matt says he's starting to feel a little weird about this. He then asks Jackson if this has anything to do with Allison because he saw them at the dance the other night. Jackson says you have a little thing for Allison, man. A little crush. And he says that he's not going to waste his time making something as ordinary as a sex tape. Matt asks what is he doing, and Jackson says he's documenting his history and he wants to see it happening. He tells Matt that he'll get the camera back tomorrow, then he goes inside. Matt then sees lights in Isaac's house. Scott asks Derek if Isaac didn't kill his father, who did, and Derek says he doesn't know yet. Scott then asks how does he know that he's telling the truth, and Derek says cause he trusts his senses and it's a combination of them, not just his sense of smell. He gives Scott a disappointed dad look, and Scott asks if he saw the lacrosse thing today, and Derek says yes. Allison bumps into a hunter dressed as deputy. She did this to see his face. Chris then calls her and Allison says she's supposed to meet Lydia and she doesn't have time to chat, and Chris says that's who they want to talk to her about. Derek makes Scott go into the basement to use his senses to figure out what happened down there. Scott then sees a lock on a fridge and Derek tells him to open it, and Scott sees multiple blood-stained scratch marks inside the fridge. Stiles is now talking to Allison and he tells her that Harris just let him out of detention and he had his phone the entire time. Allison says they need to do something now because Chris and Gerard were asking her how Lydia was bit by Peter and they sent a guy dressed as a deputy out. She says the guy left with a box that has a carving, and she sends Stiles a picture of it and he says it's wolfsbane and it means that they're going to kill Isaac. Scott then tells Derek that if they help him he has to stop going around turning people into werewolves, and Derek says he can if they're willing. Scott then asks if Derek told Isaac about the Argents and being hunted, and Derek says yes, and he still asked. Scott then says Isaac is an idiot, then Derek says you're the idiot dating Argent's daughter, and Scott is shocked by this, and Derek says yes, I know your little secret, and if he know how long does Scott think it will take for them to find out. Derek then says you saw what happens to an Omega, and he says with him Scott can learn how to use all of his senses and learn control even on a full moon. Scott says if he's with Derek he'll lose Allison, and Derek says he's going to lose her anyways and he knows that. Scott then says he's not a part of Derek's pack, but he wants Isaac out cause he's innocent. Jackson is now adjusting the camera in his room and doing a werewolf impression. Then he goes to sleep with the camera recording. The hunter disguised as a deputy is now on his way to the station and he gets out of his car because his tire was shot by an arrow, then Allison shoots him with an arrow in the leg. Allison goes into the basement and she sees Scott. She brings chains. Isaac is now in the cell and his eyes are glowing. Scott goes into the fridge of horrors and Allison kisses him, then reluctantly closes it. Stiles and Derek are now outside of the station and he tells Derek where the keys are, and Derek says he'll go in and distract the deputy at the front desk. Stiles asks how he's going to distract her and Derek says by talking to her, and Stiles asks for a sample of what he's going to say and Derek goes mute. Derek is now inside of the station and he's talking and he said he wasn't expecting someone, and the deputy says like me. Derek then says he was going to say so incredibly beautiful, but it means the same thing. The hunter is now seen limping towards Isaac's cell and he takes out the wolfsbane. Stiles run into him and he grabs him. Allison is now looking around in Isaac's house and she covers her mouth because she sees something standing and looking back at her. Scott hears this and tries to get out of the fridge, and the hunter is dragging Stiles towards the cells, and Stiles pulls the alarm and the hunter realizes that the cell is open. Isaac immediately attacks him and throws him around, then he tries to inject Isaac with the wolfsbane and Isaac grabs his arm and stops him, then knocks him out. Derek then steps on the wolfsbane and Isaac looks towards Stiles and Derek roars at him to make him shift back to his human form. Stiles sees this and asks how he did that, and Derek says, "I'm the alpha." Scott finally gets free and the creature gets down on all fours and runs away when it sees Scott. Allison asks what the hell is that, and he says he doesn't know. The sheriff then sees Stiles and the unconscious hunter. Jackson is now going through the footage and he doesn't see anything happening and he throws the camera to the ground. End. Thank you all for watching.